Imagine this. You're just trying to do business, and one of those businesses is trying to get cheap gas to Europe in order to undermine U.S. efforts to control the energy market. Not that you're particularly all that great of a capitalist power, but you're in competition with the U.S. nonetheless. Now imagine that you're a regular citizen of Germany, or maybe another country, and then all of a sudden your supply of gas, which is your heat, industrial power source, everything is just suddenly gone because a pipeline mysteriously exploded. I am, of course, referring to the NordStream2 pipeline that mysteriously exploded on December 26th last year. This caused 3 huge gas leaks preceded by a series of explosions. And these, according to Moscow, knocked out 3 of the 4 strings of the Nord Stream network. This was just off the coast of the Danish island of Bornholm. Now, it's been highly suspected, of course, that the United States was behind this attack, that it was deliberately sabotaged, with the U.S. saying that they were going to do it. And then when it happens, say they have nothing to do with it. But now, a very well-known investigative journalist in the U.S., Seymour Hersh, has finished conducting his investigation. He's an investigative journalist. He's not new at this. He has a very long history of investigating incidences like this. Well, he's done and he's published his findings. And he says, yeah, the United States did blow up the pipeline. And all evidence points to the United States blowing up the pipeline, which is an act of war. He says that Navy divers who were in Norway for the midsummer NATO exercises known as Baltops 22 were the ones who actually physically carried out this operation against the Russian pipeline. So they've got NATO exercises in the area, and that's the cover for them being there. Of course, there's people there. There's an exercise there. And according to him, the Norwegian military was actually the one who activated the explosives. They remotely detonated it once they received the relevant order from Washington. And it was C4 explosives, if you're wondering. Now, of course, when this came out, the United States being blamed for a pipeline exploding that they said themselves that they were going to destroy, the White House says, no, it's utterly false, complete fiction. Both the CIA and the U.S. State Department rejected the report. Because, obviously. Now, Hersh goes into a great deal of detail of how it was done, the people behind it, etc., which a massive trove of information that is way beyond the scope of this video. And I will give you a link to his actual report, his actual findings, and they are quite damning against the United States in what is essentially a terrorist attack against Russia. Now, of course, with this information coming out, Russia wasn't very happy about it. You know, nobody really likes being sabotaged, especially when it costs them years of repair. Now, the Russian State Duma Speaker Vyacheslav Volodin said the report is enough to demand an international, unbiased investigation into the actual explosions to find out who was the culprit and why they did it. And then theoretically have to have some kind of punishment or reprimand for it. But knowing it's the United States, they're never going to suffer for the consequences of their actions. Now, Volodin also emphasized that Washington should pay compensation to countries affected by the terrorist attacks. Now, obviously, this is a lot of lost revenue for Russia, and it's a lot of lost energy for Germany. And in fact, German energy companies who grabbed up the excess gas and then resold it at a higher price also lost out, and that you suppose theoretically you would have to pay them for the lost income they would have had. But more importantly in this situation, the Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov warned the United States that there would be consequences for their actions. And when Russia says that, that tends to carry some weight, because when they say they're going to get back at you for something, they do. Or at least they make a very serious attempt. Now, the reason the US did this was to undermine growing Russian influence in the region, in that nobody but the US is allowed to have influence, and anyone else who tries to have it should be combated in any way, shape, or form. So naturally you would want to undermine Russia, get rid of Russian natural gas supplies and put your own in. Now, because it's run by the state in Russia, they've been selling it fairly cheap at a price that the capitalists who control it in the West wouldn't be able to make a profit. But Putin has been doing it anyway, and this of course is a power play. If Putin controls your country's energy source, you're not likely to do anything against Putin or their foreign policy, like send stuff, materials, aid, etc. to Ukraine. So very clearly this is a power struggle between the United States and Russia, exerting their authority or exerting their power over these countries who are essentially being interfered with and unable to make decisions for themselves, have their own self-determination, even if it is a capitalist country like Germany. It should be allowed to choose their own policies, their own destiny, and both Russia and the United States are trying to influence that by using energy to control them. But it's not even just that. Even Germany, Western Europe, they've been taking a lot of this low-cost natural gas supplied by Russia, which, of course, reduces the economic dependence of Europe on the United States. And that's even going into Africa as well. It spreads even farther than that. And some of these countries are buying up the excess gas that they get from Russia and then reselling it to Africa at a profit. So it's in their national interest to have it as well. But it's interesting how the United States would sit here and say they had nothing to do with it. We totally had nothing to do with this situation. It's not our fault. We didn't do any of this. It's all made up by Russia. When it's interesting that there was a unified Senate that had passed a law, as Ted Cruz told Secretary Blinken, halted the pipeline in its tracks.
I have authored 2 separate pieces of legislation jointly with Senator Shaheen, bipartisan legislation, both of which have passed into law, imposing strong sanctions to prevent the completion of NordStream2. The first of those we passed in December, a little over a year ago. The second of those we passed just a little over a month ago. And as a consequence, a pipeline that was on the verge of being completed halted in its tracks.
Now, if that wasn't enough, the Undersecretary Nuland had given the same message at a State Department briefing, which the mainstream media just kind of missed. I mean, some of them did grab it, but most of them missed it, where they said, "I want to be very clear to you today. If Russia invades Ukraine, one way or another, Nord Stream 2 will not move forward."
Let me answer the first question first. If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
So, What we have here is the United States explicitly saying that they're going to stop the NordStream2 pipeline if Russia invades Ukraine. And then a few months later, when the pipeline mysteriously explodes, the United States says, oh, we had nothing to do with it. Well, you can imagine that a lot of people might be very skeptical about that and may, in fact, not believe them, considering that the U.S. has a very long history of blowing things up and then saying they had nothing to do with it. Like an Iranian airliner in the 80s killing about 250 civilians, regular people, then claiming they had nothing to do with it. And I believe it was Ronald Reagan, when confronted with it, said, "I will never apologize for anything the United States has ever done." I mean, think about it. The United States literally wants us to believe that they didn't bomb something. That's something that they're actually pretty good at, and they do quite frequently. So maybe the United States and its mainstream political establishment will forgive people when we don't believe you, because you do always lie about these kinds of things, and nobody has any reason to believe you whatsoever. And once again, we are left with a situation where the U.S. has carried out what is a terrorist attack on another country, and it will go unpunished. And the United States has the self-righteous stance that somehow they're the victims in the world, and that they're the ones who are always being persecuted, when most of that is Yankee go home, get out of our country, and then somehow the U.S. thinks that means they're being treated unfairly as they're occupying someone else's country. The world is desperate to move past the existence of the United States, and that is something that very dearly needs to happen. Unfortunately, it's not going to be that easy. We're going to be left with other imperialist powers. The growing imperialism of Russia and the already astronomical imperialism of China as well. We're replacing one imperialist power with another. We're not creating a multipolar world. We're just switching which one is the unipolar power, and then pretending that somehow all of Lenin's writings against multipolarism somehow just didn't exist. Or don't exist, sorry. But the point here is to point out that the United States very much is responsible for that explosion. They very clearly did do it. All the evidence points to them, all the circumstantial evidence points to them, and even all the surface level common sense points directly to them. But unfortunately, it was the United States, which means nothing is going to get done. Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.